Well, a place like Cambridge has got a lot of challenges, and we can only do those when we've got greater freedoms from government. And at the moment, government makes all the rules, controls all the money, and then comes in with extra intervention. So the opportunity for me from devolution and for Cambridge City Council is particularly to tackle affordable housing, but also we've got a hothouse of growth and we want to share that on a much wider geography. So it's a bit of a gamble. There are risks, but devolution offers opportunities to get at some of the powers and control that Whitehall has exercised and make decisions locally and do that across a geography that helps Cambridge and our wider county.
I think there are four main points I would want to get across in relation to our experience of doing research on austerity. The first one is that the agenda is very clearly set by Whitehall. When Leicester put forward a proposal for a combined authority, it was knocked back because they didn't want a metro mayor. Leicester already has a city mayor, they didn't want a second one. And one of the things that leads us to suggest is that we're not only seeing a scalar mess in some of these devolution proposals and devolution decisions from government, but also scalar madness. I think the second thing to say, looking at localism in a slightly broader context, is that while some functions are being localised, others are being centralised. In the field of welfare, for example, it's very clear that the Department of Work and Pensions sets the agenda and controls the implementation of welfare reform. And this has consequences for tens of thousands of people in cities over which local government and local voluntary organisations have very little leverage. There's not a great deal they can do apart from pick up the pieces of what central government is doing. So what kind of localism is that? The third thing that I want to draw attention to is the way that the local voluntary sector and the social fabric of cities is being hollowed out by austerity. Voluntary organisations are going to the wall. Larger organisations from outside the locality are mopping up government funds and programme funds, which means that the ability of local voluntary organisations to anticipate problems, to organise communities locally, to give them a voice, is being seriously diminished. So we're left with a number of questions about what kind of localism are we seeing? Is this the kind of localism that cities and towns actually want? And is it the kind of localism that we need?
Devolution does offer the opportunity to turn around decades of over-centralisation in England, and yet the way in which the process has been set, driven and developed is not without issues. And looking at what's happening in the north of England clearly shows this. There seems to be at least three sets of interrelated issues in this respect. Firstly, deals have been agreed on an individual basis between the government and local authorities, leading to the creation of bespoke partnership based on disparate geographies that do not cover the whole of the north of England and are asymmetric in terms of the powers and responsibilities involved. So we see that multiple new and often overlapping structures such as combined authorities, metro mayors, and also broader agendas such as the Northern Powerhouse are being introduced as part of this process and juxtaposed to an already overcrowded system of governance. Secondly, the dominant discourse of devolution promoted by the government has set local authorities to compete against each other because it's strongly focused on the idea of economic development. And this is fueling friction and rivalries between deal haves and have-nots, creating a sort of a market type of competition. There may seem some area raised, but also many areas fall. And also this seems to run counter the very idea of the creation of a northern powerhouse. Then the debate on devolution in the north has been essentially an elite to elite one, with a strong top-down lead from the government. The public has been left out from the process and remains largely unaware of the fact that new political structures are being created around them. So this raises concerns about the levels of accountability and democratic engagement that the newly created devolution structures will have in the future. So overall, devolution deals do offer a great opportunity, but there is also a wide range of risks that are associated with them. And if these are not addressed promptly, the process of devolution in the north, as in the rest of England, could end up being a mere centrally orchestrated patchwork of spatial and governance fixes that lack a common purpose and crucially also lack a clear end point.
What I think is that a well-designed policy has to have clear, non-contradictory objectives, that it has to be a policy built on mechanisms that we're confident will work. It has to be well thought through in terms of separating the problem from the solutions so that you get a clear view of what the possible solutions are, and not to get too obsessed with individual solutions. That it has to be a policy you can assess on the basis of the objectives you first set yourself, and there shouldn't be any drift of policy away from those original objectives, and that the policy should be implemented without there being any obvious single points of failure, any elements of the policy which, if they go, the whole policy collapses, and you need to redesign a policy where, if you implement it, it will have those kind of single points of failure. And my assessment is that the devolution to cities and counties policy fails on all those. That its objectives are not clear and contradictory. There are objectives such as the need for speed in decision making and the need for bigger, greater engagement, political engagement of the public, which is obviously incompatible. It's not obvious how you do really effective economic development without there being some net cost, and it's in fact difficult to see how you can install a new tier of government without there being net cost. So that's the objectives problem. When you move to the issue of the effectiveness of the mechanisms, there's lots of evidence that there are two mechanisms being chosen. One is these mayors, metro mayors, and the other is basically building an extra tier of local government for the mayors to preside over. There's no real evidence that any of the objectives we've just been talking about will be met by either of these mechanisms. Mayors, for example, there's no evidence that they help in economic development. There's no evidence they help in engaging the public. Turnouts in local elections are the same for mayors or non-mayors. In terms of speed, there might be a very small improvement in the mayoral councils compared to the non-mayoral ones, but it is quite tiny and might not even exist if you look at the data over a longer period of time than I was able to. And so you can go down all these mechanisms and all these goals and see that the two mechanisms chosen by the government, the mayors and the extra tier, don't work. So then the third problem is the obsession with the notion of the solution of the mayoralty, which gets in the way of thinking about more effective ways of doing the same thing, or even just obstructs the implementation of effective policy. So, for example, on economic development, yes, we know that infrastructure investment is a good thing, especially in transport and in communications infrastructure. And we know that investing in education is a good thing, especially tertiary education in developed countries. But why should the government want to delay the implementation of those investments for the sake of enforcing a new structure in local government? Especially as we know that new structures themselves, there's no evidence that they improve things. And so this obsession with the mayoralty, I think, is a a deep flaw in the policy. It gets in the way of doing sensible things in other areas. And so then you move to, are there single points of failure in this design? And the single points of failure in the design are the mayor itself. That if the mayor goes wrong, if the mayor is not very good or in fact dangerous in the way they're conducting local affairs, what's going to happen? How do you get rid of them? And with normal structures in British politics, with prime ministers or with council leaders, they can be removed by their own groups, by parliamentary parties or by council groups, and you can get a new one fairly quickly. With mayors you can't do that. The only way you can get rid of them is by legal process. It takes a long time and is very expensive and might not work. The other single point of failure is the Treasury. Now, many of these deals have financial settlements, which are both short and long term. And there are deals and agreements, but these agreements are not legally binding. You can't hold the Treasury to them. The short-term ones, where they throw money in to get a deal, perhaps you can rely on those more than the long-term ones, but the short-term ones are lots of them in areas which are not obviously related to the main lines of the deals anyway, so it's not clear whether they're in line with objectives. And so the Treasury is in a position, I think, to turn these deals off, both in terms of money and in terms of regulation, of getting local government to do what the Treasury wants. And so it seems to me that if you look at all these various factors, this is a badly designed policy. People in the past have said that this area policy is not a catastrophe, it's not a disaster, it's more a non-event. And it seems to me that, given these flaws, this looks likely to be another disappointing area policy where there'll be vast hopes for change and improvement, and there might be some slight improvements, but looking back at it, when we do look back at it in a few decades' time, it will seem not to have been worth it.